Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech. Joining us today is Jamie Stamper, Technology Integration Specialist at Beaver Creek City Schools. Hey, Jamie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
We're good. Thank you. We're so glad that you are chatting with us today.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah. So I first want to know a little bit about your journey through education that led you to your current role as integration specialist.
So, I started teaching kind of in the mid 90s. I spent about 20 years in the classroom. I taught secondary English. So, for the last 10 years in the classroom, I taught just seniors, which is great. You can have wonderful conversations with them. At the same time, Christmas time, they're usually starting to put one foot out the door. So, it's a bit of a trade off. During that time, I picked up my master's degree from the University of Dayton. It was in educational technology and started to do some work with online classes using discussion forums. And this is probably in the later 90s. So, kind of all of this is just catching on at that point.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I found that Beaver Creek was having an opening for a technology specialist and decided to step out of the classroom, step into that role. And it has just been a journey ever since. So COVID was kind of right in the middle of that. So that was a good time. I think everybody who went through COVID in technology is now like battle tested. So that's kind of how I arrived where I am today.
Okay. So, did you, as a high school English teacher, were you incorporating technology at all?
So I spent 8 years of my career at Mad River Local Schools.
Okay.
And then I moved over to Beaver Creek for the last 12 that I was in the classroom. During that time, I created some online modules. So, and we were using Moodle at the
Okay.
time because it was free. Everybody used Moodle because it was free. Online discussion forums were really big at the time, and I got really deep into those. They were a great tool, I found, to draw students into the conversation. That student that sits in the back never really says much in class, may post something online that is really meaningful. And I found that you could use that as the anchor, kind of, get them hooked and then pull them into the conversation. And that's how I tended to use technology whenever I was in the classroom. By the time I finished in the classroom, I had at one point had flipped my classroom for a while. I'll be honest, I found that flipping my classroom, it was a great idea. It was really difficult for me, for my style of educating. Like, I really love to hear what students say, and then we might go off on some tangents along the way. And so, although I would still make videos, I didn't fully flip my classroom for a long period of time. It was probably about 6 months. And then I continued to use Moodle. In the last couple of years in Beaver Creek, we have had Canvas. One of the things that I've been working with teachers in the district on is trying to provide more online content to students. And so this job allows me to kind of work on the other side of what I was already doing as a teacher. Now, instead of just creating content for students, I'm supporting the content that teachers create for students.
Yeah, which is great because they know something could work, but the figuring out and the implementation piece of it isn't
Right.
always like, oh, yeah, let me
Yes.
start that tomorrow.
Well, and sometimes teachers just, they know what they want to achieve in their lesson. What they don't know is what are the right tools to do that with. And so sometimes that conversation is as easy as, did you think about using Jamboard? Did you think about using Google Slides? And, if you use one, here's the benefits, here's the drawbacks. If you use the other, same thing. And sometimes that's all you have to give them is some ideas of what that next step is. And then they're off and running.
Yeah, which is a nice lead in to our tools. So with AI kind of taking education by storm. I guess I'm just going to start, like, if you went to talk to a teacher about, Chat GPT or any of the other AI tools, the millions that are...
There's more every day, right?
Yeah, coming. Like, how would you explain what it is to them? Like, if you were just going to give them a general overview, what would you say?
And that's a really great question, because this is where we're at in our district right now. We are getting ready to hold a PD session. I'm working with one of our instructional coaches, and we're actually looking at how teachers can use AI to benefit themselves and their students in the classroom. So what I would present to them is that AI is simply an assistant to teaching. It is the best sidekick you could have for teaching. But the metaphor that I've kind of started using with teachers, because you get a lot of pushback immediately. AI is in the news every day. At 8:31 this morning, the Journal just put out another article about AI and how it impacts the classroom. So if you are signed up for any sort of online technology journals, you're seeing those articles just roll in constantly. Mm-hmm. So teachers are, when you say it's taking them by storm, like, they are certainly like fully under that cloud right now. It is just pouring on them.
Yeah.
So the metaphor I use for them is, it's just a calculator, ultimately. And there is a time and a place to use a calculator, and there's a time and a place not to use a calculator. And I think that is where a lot of teachers get stuck right now with AI. They immediately go to this place of, my students, they're ELA teachers. My students are all going to just, have Chat GPT write their paper for them. Right. Well, if you let them use the calculator all the time, they indeed are going to use the calculator all the time. So sometimes you have to say, I know that there are resources out there that could write this for you, but that's not our goal. My goal is not to just generate the product. My goal is to teach you something during that process. And so what is it that we really want to focus on? And it's probably not just churning out that end product, that paper, and me grading it. It's, what are you learning during that? So that's kind of how we're having the conversation with teachers, is just looking at it like a tool. And I call it a calculator a lot these days, because it really is that age old. If you were from the 70s or 80s, your teacher probably said, like, you're not going to have a calculator with you all the time. Like, well, indeed I do. Do I use it all the time? No, but I have access to it. And so I think that's where AI is going. Our students today, who are in elementary school, certainly are going to enter a workforce where they probably don't have to know everything, and they don't have to write everything or, write the code for it. They're going to have that assistant with them, that calculator, doing that piece of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of frame it. Yeah. Because it's just another disruption. Like, the calculator was looked at as like a disruption, and AI is now a educational like disruption. And so it's just about shifting how you're going to approach it. So totally makes sense to me. And I think that's a good way to present it.
How could teachers utilize this new tool that they have, their new sidekick, right, in their lessons?
I mentioned that we're doing a PD session with our teachers. And so differentiation is one of those pieces. In Beaver Creek, that differentiation piece is very important to us. We try to incorporate it in everything we do in our curriculum. And at the same time, just in the nature of education, we've had to do some restructuring of some of our classes. And so now we have multiple levels. For example, in some of our ELA classes, we have combined them so that we intentionally have more than one kind of level of student sitting there that needs to be educated. And each level should get its own differentiated material. In addition, every student has their own unique needs. So now we've taken that differentiation, and it's not just maybe 2 or 3 big kind of tracks of differentiation, but it's now down to the individual. The nice thing about, and I'm going to make a disclaimer that I'm going to use ChatGPT and AI interchangeably. So I apologize, because there are, at this point, and I just looked yesterday, there are, it looks like we're in the thousands now of AI engines that are out there. It looks like not all of them are quite functional yet, but everybody is hopping on board with getting, their stake in AI put out there.
Yeah.
But very easily, what a teacher can do with ChatGPT or with other AI engines is they could sit down and feed it a passage that students are reading. And in the past, what teachers probably would have done is they would have identified some key terminology in that text, or they would have identified a passage and they would have had students, define those terms, talk about how they impact the overall meaning of what the student is reading, or how that passage, plays into the overall story or the overall text. And that's great for most students. But if you find students that maybe they have an accelerated vocabulary, maybe to them, these words, they define them the second that they read them. And to them, they don't need to look them all up. They understood what the message was, based on that vocabulary. And then on the other side of that, you've got students that maybe struggle with their language skills and their vocabulary isn't as strong. And, it's going to possibly take them a very long time just to define some terms. Maybe they get kind of bogged down in those terms and they never get past it. And so the overall message of the text is lost on them. So what AI can do is it can give you some levels, but it can also very quickly, in unique circumstances for specific students, generate materials just for them. And those are things that great teachers were always doing.
Right.
Like there isn't anything really new here. The real difference is the speed at which it can be accomplished. Yeah. And that is really one of the benefits to teachers is when you look at AI and you think, how can this help me? It really shouldn't be helping you in any way that you weren't already helping yourself. Because I think most educators are great educators. And so they were already doing all of these steps, but that was your weekend. That was your evening. That was, working at times when you really didn't want to work, because education is a business that happens outside of the classroom and really outside of the school day a lot. Like that's just the given. What AI does is simply speed up that process for them. And it gives teachers back some pieces of their life that maybe they haven't had in a long time. It also allows them to not get bogged down in those housekeeping duties, in what I would call those domestic teaching duties of, hey, I've got 3 vocabulary lists. I've got 4 passages. I had to make up questions for each of those. And it very quickly gives them some starter material. Now, what I will be telling all of the teachers that attend our session, what I would tell any teacher is, it's just starter material. It's like purchasing a workbook or, purchasing a worksheet. You should always be looking at that and thinking, does this really meet the needs of my students? And because there's going to be some fine tuning there. And so that's my approach to AI with teachers is, let's give you some time back. One, for your life, because that's just fair. Like, it ought to help you live a better life. But at the same time, in teaching, it's giving you all those materials that you are already creating, or in some circumstances, maybe you wish you had time to create, because to be honest, there are lessons that we all wish that we could, like, we have an idea and we just don't have time to get it to fruition. And so it gives you time and some resources and an assistant, a calculator, to quickly get to that end and kind of get that material.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like, I used to tell all my friends, like, come August, my life was over. So, I'll see them in May.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like whenever you can make it work. So yeah, why not take advantage?
Right. And again, I think a lot of teachers are approaching this with the lens of my students are just, it's what happened with math when photo math came out. My students are just, they're going to jump to the end and have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that we are to a point that the answer is almost a given.
Yeah.
The answer is easy to come up with. What is hard to come up with is, what do I do when the answer doesn't make sense?
Mm-hmm.
How do I go back in the process and see where I got off track? And if I'm using AI and it doesn't give me what I want, how do I rephrase my request? How do I fine tune what it is that I want it to do? Or it does give me something, but it's not quite what I wanted. How do I then take that and build upon it? So they still need those skills.
Mm-hmm.
The math students still need to know how to do math. The ELA students still need to know how to write. But I go back to goals.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we mistake our end product for our goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it really shouldn't be. The end product is just what we attained through this process. And the process is learning. And I think for most educators, that's their real goal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think sometimes, students really some students can really struggle with that piece of explaining how they got somewhere as opposed to just giving you what you wanted, like the answer, but like sometimes they struggle to explain how they got to that destination, which I think is a great skill to have in any, I don't know, life scenario,
any subject or any field. Yeah.
So again, I taught seniors for my last 10 years in the classroom. A great piece of that is you can have these wonderful discussions. They have developed to a point where they really are ready to start thinking like adults. They don't always think like adults, to be honest, but they're ready to. And so probably probably my last 8 years of that, my opening day conversation with them was, so you already know all the answers. At that point, cell phones everybody had a cell phone. You could look up, at Googling it had become, a term.
Yeah.
We were all Googling it. And so I simply led with the discussion of, you already know what the answer is. I'm telling you, you know the answers. There's nothing in here that you won't know the answer for. So if that's the case, what I would tell them is the answer is not important any longer, because that's easy to come up with. What is important is, how did you get to that answer? And how I would explain it to them is, your brain made a series of decisions. It processed all this information, and you did that so fast that you never even looked at it. And what we're going to do this year is we're going to go back through that process. We're going to force you to look at it, because you are going to arrive at the wrong answer sometimes. And you need to be able to step back in that process and say, well, maybe I wasn't wrong the whole way through. Maybe I was wrong, just this last piece was wrong. But if you can't identify that, then you're going to struggle. And I don't think AI changes any of that. Again, it speeds it up. That's kind of where we're at. So, and again, not to go back to this, it's the calculator. Like, the same principles, the same mathematical concepts are happening. It's just the speed at which they can happen. And if all I care about in math is that my students have the answer, well, then give them a calculator, because they're going to have one with them every day of their life. But I don't think that's our goal. Our goal isn't just churn out the product, get the answer. It's, what did you learn through that? How did you develop?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think, again, like I said, it kind of serves them in every aspect of their life, because it's kind of almost just like self-reflection. If you grow as a human, you have to be able to reflect on yourself and what you've done or actions you've taken in order to continue to grow. And some people may not necessarily intuitively have those skills, or they've never kind of learned that piece.
We all learn it. It's just, do we learn it the easier way or the hard way?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, but no, that's the human condition, is just growth.
Yeah.
And again, I feel pretty certain in saying that our current elementary students are going to inherit a world where suddenly they have a lot more time to reflect on that, like, inward growth, because their work is going to be easier than it is for us today. So, I mean, and that's key. How do we get better through all of this?
Teachers, you can now earn contact hours toward grad credit for listening to the podcast.
Visit fortheloveofedtech.org for more information.
I'm also curious what your perspective is on this idea of, with all of the AI coming into the world, how do we know what's real and what's not?
That is a tough question.
And
so yesterday I was actually just playing around with a bunch of different AI engines. One of them was a recipe engine. You could tell it anything you wanted, and it would start giving you recipes, and playing with some different ones. But I really was thinking at one point, like, how do you know that it isn't? And in the business of AI, they don't call it lying, which I find it's very interesting. When AI tells you something that is untrue, they call it a hallucination.
Gaslit by AI here.
So I'm going to throw out a couple of resources for anybody that's interested in, you have a little bit of time and you want to just kind of see what's out there about AI. 60 Minutes did a great session on Google Bard, and kind of bring it back to what we were talking about. In the middle of that, they ask Google Bard something about inflation and how inflation is going to impact the world. And they say, and it gave us, I think, 5 novels to read. And it gave them the information for these 5 novels. And the next piece of the clip is, we found out a few days later that none of those novels, none of those works actually exist. It had just made up all 5 of them. And then they go into some discussion about, a hallucination, that when AI makes something up, it's hallucinating. And I thought it was a really interesting way to phrase it at the time, because part of me is sort of thinking, like, so hallucinating or lying, like, that's, it's an interesting, but I think the difference there is, with AI, it really is just, machine learning. Like, it is a very advanced set of algorithms that can calculate very quickly, but it has to have a data set. It's not actually just making things up with intent. It was asked a question and it gave some information back, but that information was imaginary. It was a hallucination. Like, they didn't intend to do that, or it didn't intend to do that. So, and I think that's kind of the interesting piece, is that we're not to a point with AI where it's an actual, like, it's not sentient. It's not actually thinking. It's not intending to do all of these things. And I think maybe some people think, like, oh, well, it's, we're stepping into that science fiction realm. Like, we're not yet. And maybe yet is the key word. But it isn't always truthful. So it just doesn't intend to not be truthful. And that's why, going back to when you look at using AI, you still have to be the expert as the teacher. There is still a value in knowing your content area and really knowing and I'm going to use ELA here, knowing that text that you're teaching, and have, gone through and being able to really drill down into some passages. Because if you're thinking, hey, I'm just going to feed this into the AI and it's going to give me some great material, it probably will. Is it correct material? Well, that is a much trickier question. And to be fair, again, we're already doing this in the education world. I'm not going to name any names here, but we picked up a new product this year that we are using in our district, and we found early on, it's a brand new product, it's just been released, that it had some inaccurate material in it. And our teachers caught that because they're experts in what they do. Right. And so again, I think those teachers that are thinking, hey, this is going to replace me, or it's suddenly the need for me to be as good as I am in my content area, maybe that's lessened. I don't think it is. I think it's even more important, because you can't just trust what the machine is going to give you. Yeah. You've got to actually know it and review it.
For sure. And I think that's a good statement to reiterate.
Well, and I think that's where students get themselves maybe a little bit into trouble, is they're thinking, I'm going to have, the AI write my paper for me or do my work for me. And to be honest, they're still learning. They're probably not experts in that area, and they just trust what it gives them, and they pass that on to their teacher, and then their teacher says, like, aha, that seems inaccurate. And there are different AI detectors that, for ELA, they can put the paper through it and it will give them the probability of whether an AI engine wrote it. But I think, honestly, probably what I would call like teacher gut, that feeling of, I know my students. Yeah. I know how they write. I know generally what they can produce is maybe that first best detector. And that might lead you to a conversation of like, wow, I've got a student this year, like they just blow me away. That is awesome. Or it may lead you to that conversation of, wow, you are going to have to redo that assignment because you just had the machine do it for you. One of the ways that we're going to talk to teachers about using it is looking at, what do you want the student to actually do here? And oftentimes, I think that we're thinking that students have to complete the entire process of, looking at the material, generating the great idea that they're going to talk about with the material, supporting the great idea, producing the product based on the great idea. And for some students, that's really difficult, to be honest, and I know that all of us hold our own content area like near and dear to our heart. But to be fair, everyone else in the world probably does not hold it near and dear to their heart. And so sometimes students need that ability to say, like, what do I start with? So maybe one way of looking at AI with your students is, I want students to write the paper. So we're going to have, ChatGPT generate outlines. Like that's what we're going to do in class today. Go ahead and it will generate a different outline for every student, because if everyone asks it individually, then it'll give it to them somewhat individualized. But then we're going to turn off our devices and we're going to sit down and we're going to write that paper. I still expect that you read the material, learn the material, can support ideas, can craft an argument, or can provide supporting details, and we're still arriving at the same goal. What we didn't do is sit there for possibly days on end trying to come up with some great idea. And to be really honest, I have 4 kids. One's graduated college, one's in college, 2 are still in high school. To, I guess, break everyone's heart, like students today don't really go out and just think of that new idea or that great idea. They're going to go out and they're going to Google it. Again, they're just doing it. They're doing it the slow way. So AI, again, it's the calculator. It just speeds things up. It's going to get us to a point where we can move past the come up with a great idea, and we can move right into, what is my goal? My goal for this lesson is to teach you how to provide ample support for an argument. So we're going to move right into that. And again, those are some easy ways that you can use it in your classroom. You might have it generate 3 different essays on the same topic, or 3 different responses to the same topic. And then, as a class, discuss which one is the better response and why is it better?
Mm-hmm.
Those are maybe questions we don't always get to in the classroom because we don't have time. Why? Why do we think this word is more appropriate than this word? And really drill down into that, because when we send them off one day, they're off in the workforce. They're going to be sitting there like they're responsible for coming up with that. Why do I choose one over the other?
Mm-hmm.
And that one over the other is the difference between, the highway running around the town and the highway running through the town.
Mm-hmm.
So and I think that's, again, it's doing what is already being done.
Yeah.
It's just doing it faster.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, you're getting to like those higher order thinking skills quicker.
And that gives you the most special thing that you can have in the classroom: time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Time to sit down and actually explore those topics and not get bogged down with the process of getting to the topic. But now I can really extend that thinking, and I can do it in a manner that my students are here with me, possibly, and we're all having that conversation. And in modern education, there are so many things that are happening to get back to that idea of how can I have that meaningful interaction with my students, and meaningful in a way that maybe isn't tangible right now, but in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, it makes the singular difference in my student's life.
Yeah.
That discussion really changed the course of things. And I think those are the moments we can never know, but those are the moments we really ought to always be striving for. So to jump back a little bit, we were talking about some resources that if teachers are interested, some things that they might check out. And one of the ones, I'm not going to go too much into this because they can watch it if they want, but Sal Khan, who is the founder of Khan Academy, he just did a TED Talk. And I think it's just a couple weeks old at this point, but it is about Khanmigo, which is Khan Academy's AI, and they're embedding it in Khan Academy, that they're embedding it as a tutor. It is your tutoring assistant that's there for you. And if you watch, he's got a TED Talk. If you watch it, it is kind of like a product demo, to be honest.
Okay.
But what I came away with is that is everything you would want in a great teacher. It asks great questions at great times. One of the pieces that he reiterated several times was it doesn't give you the answer.
Okay.
It won't just answer the question for you. It's going to prompt you with a question. It's going to go back to that Socratic method where, I ask a question, you ask a question, I ask another question, and eventually we arrive at where we're going. But we had to walk through that. And in looking at that kind of product demo in the TED Talk, I really think that's what we're going to see more of in education. Is we're going to see curriculum companies, textbook companies, that they're going to begin to market these products hand in hand with what they're already selling to schools, because it's really a tutor. How many times do students get home and, either they need somebody to ask and there's not somebody there at that time, or to be honest, we all have the joke of, trying to help children with Common Core math. It's really difficult. That, like, I can't come up with the right answer, and to have a tutor that understands all the math concepts, and it's, again, we expect students to be well-versed across a number of areas. And to be honest, not all parents, not all guardians, not all teachers are as well-versed in all those areas. So I think that's what you're going to see more of. Is Khan Academy was kind of the first big demo that I had seen of one. But I think probably within, I think next school year, it's probably going to gain a lot of, like, here it comes. And I think by the following school year, so 2 years out from where we're at now, I really think it's going to become more the norm. Like, we are just going to have to accept it. So that means in 2 years, we've gone from sort of this knee-jerk, AI is going to take my job as a teacher, to here you go, you've got your built-in tutor. If you have questions tonight as you're reading, it's there. You can tap into it. And again, now I, the teacher in the classroom, have to step back and think like, so what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
So, because I'm hopefully doing a lot more than just managing my students. I'm getting them to extend beyond that. Because again, we've got the answer. We can arrive at it pretty easily. I think AI changes how we approach that. Yeah. And it changes how fast we can move through some parts of it.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. This was actually easier than I thought.
See, I told you.
Leave that in there too.
About. Thanks for listening to our For the Love of EdTech podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something you can use with your own students. You can find the show notes, resources, and more at www.fortheloveofedtech.org.
For Love of EdTech is produced by SOITA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati.